So it looks like the trade war just ended. The Nasdaq's jumped 8%, S&P 500's jumped 6%. It looks like Bitcoin is reclaiming 82,000. Ethereum's pumped all the way up to 1,600. So markets are loving this sigh of relief that just happened. Now, we also have to talk about some Ethereum FUD that came out this morning, and then I have a chart that I'd like to show y'all that says that the bull market is just now getting started. So let's go ahead and dive in here, see what's going on. So this is kind of funny this morning. So before all this news came out, Donald Trump tweeted out, "This is a great time to buy." Now, everybody had some fun with this because the last time a person from the Trump family said now's a great time to buy, it was talking about Ethereum, and then unfortunately, the price went down considerably after that. So everybody's joking that, oh gosh, this is a top signal, even though we've already kind of gone down. But this actually turned to be true. So he basically told the American people, buy the stock, because he was planning to do this. So breaking, President Trump authorizes 90-day pause on tariffs. Now, this is interesting because this is tariffs on all the other countries except for China. So China still has the tariffs on, and we can go to his exact tweet to kind of cover this. So he says, based on the lack of respect that China has shown the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the United States of America to 125%. This is in addition to the 104% that he had already raised because China came out and they retaliated again, and now the United States is retaliating again. So it's this back and forth thing. He says, effective immediately. It says, at some point in the future, hopefully the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA, and this is interesting, and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Now, it's interesting that he's starting to talk about other countries here, and we just saw him pull tariffs from these 75 other countries. Interesting. So there are rumors swirling that what Trump is trying to do is China's not as dependent on the United States for manufacturing anymore. I think we make up something like 20 or 25% of their exports now. It's not what it was his first term. And so what the rumors that are swirling are that he's trying to get other countries to turn on China and impose tariffs on them to sort of isolate them and force them to get into some sort of a negotiation. I think that could work. That could be highly effective. I think that it's really risky because you're kind of backing somebody into a corner there. And when people get desperate, they do stupid things. So we're just gonna have to see how this plays out. Right now, the market's loving it because the tariffs have been pulled for the most part, except for the ones on China, and those are really the big one, right? China and the United States are the two largest economies in the entire world, and we need that situation to be resolved. But at least half of the trade war seems to be over. I expect within this 90-day period, some negotiations, some deals going to be struck, and this whole thing will be behind us. So now moving on to some Ethereum news. So this was swirling around this morning, and the claim is that World Liberty Financial, that's Donald Trump's company, sold their Ethereum. Now, I did some digging into this, and it's not that clean cut. So they post this address here. If you want, you can follow me on X. It's L3O, last name Lanza. But you can find this thread here. I posted the address that they're talking about. So Arkham Research had tagged this as World Liberty Fi ? And what the question mark means is it means that we don't know if this is a World Liberty Financial address. And so after I did some clicking and looking around, I found that it's basically an address that interacted with an address that maybe interacted with the World Liberty Financial protocol at some point. We don't know whether it is an actual address that is owned by Trump or not. But my take is that it makes zero sense for the president to sell Ethereum at a loss because he's the president. I mean, he's got look what he's done with the markets just by this tariff situation. Why would he willingly take a huge loss on a trade? That doesn't make sense. He could push some legislation or say something and pump the markets and get out at break even if he wanted to. So what do I think is actually going on here? I think there's a really good chance that this isn't an address associated with Donald Trump, but let's say that it is. Let's say that this is his address and he did sell Ethereum. Well, the most logical explanation is that this is tax loss harvesting. So they bought it way up here. Okay, well, they're selling for a loss, and now they can write that off on their taxes. It makes perfect sense. So that's what I think is most likely going on. It's either tax loss harvesting or it's just not his account at all. But I find it funny that there's so much short pressure on Ethereum right now, and then we get this news, everybody, all these influencers with really big followings start coming out and pumping out this article saying, oh, World Liberty, Donald Trump's companies started selling their Ethereum at a loss. Get that real dramatic effect and get people scared. But you dig into it, and then it's not what it appears to be. So continuing on here, VanEck, apparently the Chinese and Russian governments have started settling energy trades in Bitcoin. So that was kind of interesting that had come out. So now let's go ahead and dive into this chart here. And cool, so y'all can still see that. So what we are looking at is we're looking at the Bitcoin chart, and these green lines here are going to be your halvings every 4 years. There's two theories that are going around. You have the 4-year halving that says that, every 4 years the block reward gets cut in half. So if the block reward was 50 for the first block halving, it gets cut down to 25. That creates a supply crunch and prices moon. And so the theory is that this is what drives the Bitcoin cycles. I don't think that's the case. I think that's wrong. I think that's a coincidence. I think that it certainly plays a role in the price going up, but I don't think that's the main driver, because the way that I see it, what the Bitcoin halving does is it cuts the sell pressure that miners have on the market in half. So if you have all these miners that are mining the Bitcoin, they get their rewards, they have to sell those Bitcoin for a fixed cost. And whenever you sell them for a fixed cost, and then suddenly that gets cut in, not a fixed cost, but for further expenses, like electricity, rent, those types of things, new miner rigs. But whenever that gets cut in half, well, now the sell pressure's gone, right? So you've gone from 50 Bitcoin worth of sell pressure down to 25. And so that acts like a spring where suddenly there's less sell pressure on the market. And so the spring just jumps. And so that's why we see these massive pumps in the market, or at least part of it. Now, if the 4-year cycle is correct, then what we can do is we can go from the halving, right? We just measure out to the peak of the bull run, and you see that this first one is 371 days. We go to the second halving, measure out to the peak of the bull run, 518 days. We go to the third halving, measure to the peak of the bull run, 546 days. So in theory, if we measure from the current halving that just happened in April of 2024, and I think I measured out 530 days, I just kind of split the difference between the last two halvings, that means that we should peak in September 29th of this year, but I don't think that's the case. If we look at the global liquidity, which drives all asset values that are like risk assets, it drives them higher, because as you increase the global liquidity, the amount of money flowing around in the economy, it inevitably finds its way into risk assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, stocks, etc. Now, what you'll notice, if we come back to the second halving here, you'll notice that global liquidity, which is marked by this black squiggly line here, it spiked above the 100-period DEMA, and then we saw price, Bitcoin, begin to move higher into the halving, right? So the global liquidity increasing triggered the bull run before the halving did. Now, some people might argue that, well, that was caused by people getting excited about the halving. But I say no, because if we come over here and we look at the COVID scare, you can see that as prices started to tank because they're closing everything down, they started pumping liquidity into the market. Now, I don't think that people would get excited about the Bitcoin halving whenever you're having a global pandemic. They're shutting countries down and everything. Like, people aren't really all that concerned about a Bitcoin halving at that point. It was the global liquidity increase spike that triggered the reversal in Bitcoin. So now, if we're going to go from the assumption that the bull runs are caused by the liquidity cycle, then what we can do is we can measure. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to fix this a little bit. We can measure from the point at which global liquidity spikes out to the bull run peaks. and figure out how long does this liquidity cycle typically last. So this first one here, it lasted 679 days. The next one lasted 609 days. And so if that's the case, we're just now seeing global liquidity spike above the DEMA because China's having to pump money out and debase their currency to combat these tariffs. So they're contributing to that. The United States Fed hasn't yet started to contribute to global liquidity in a meaningful way. But global liquidity is above the 100 DMA. So basically this is saying that, hey, the bull run is starting. This is it. Might not feel like it because of the whole tariff scare and everything, but in my opinion, as long as global liquidity keeps rising, this should be the end of it, or this should be the beginning of it. So if we measure out from where we are forward 660 days, so that means that the bull run should continue from now all the way to December of 2026. And so what that looks like to me, that means that this bull run is looking a whole lot more like a supercycle or like the 2016-2017 bull run, where you can look at the price and it's trending in this long-term trend channel at the very bottom here, just kind of trending, grinding higher. And we saw a very similar pattern back in 2016 where it's just grinding in this lower boundary. And then towards the second half of the bull run, it just goes parabolic. And so I'm expecting a very similar thing to happen this time. So at some point, maybe later on this year, maybe beginning of 2026, we'll start to get into that parabolic phase and Bitcoin just start to take off. And we get up here into the $1 million price target. But that's not until, Q4, basically around Christmas of, or January 2027, 2026. And so everybody that's been attacking everybody's been attacking Ethereum saying, oh, it's performing so badly. Well, that's because it's like this illusion in the market where people have thought that we're in a bull run because the price of Bitcoin's going up, but we're not, because it's really difficult to have a bull run when global liquidity is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I know that Ethereum got very, very close to its all-time highs and Bitcoin has even gone higher. But I would argue that the fact that we are in a tightened monetary policy where the global liquidity has been decreasing this entire time as the prices were going higher, I would say that shows how powerful this coming bull run is going to be. The fact that prices were able to reach their all-time highs when liquidity was actively being sucked out of the global markets. Bitcoin and Ethereum were both, Bitcoin exceeded its all-time high, but Ethereum got very close to it. That tells me how strong the market actually is on a very long-term scale. So once global liquidity, as we're seeing right now, starts rising, this could be a really, really interesting bull run. This could be the super cycle, because if you think about kind of the macro picture with like institutional adoption and all the regulatory chains that have kind of been lifted off this industry, we're seeing countries looking at buying Bitcoin. We're seeing a stablecoin legislation and adoption. We're seeing BlackRock talking about tokenizing stocks and bonds as quickly as possible. I think that this is the strongest case we have for this being an actual super cycle for the crypto markets. So until next time, I'll talk to y'all soon.